The evening air was filled with the gentle hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the soft rustle of elegant dresses. A charity gala was taking place in the grand hall of a historic building, one that had been standing for over 100 years. Its walls were lined with tall, polished windows, reflecting the golden light from massive chandeliers that hung from the ceiling like frozen flames. Guests arrived in pairs or small groups, each looking more glamorous than the last. Men wore sharp tuxedos, their shoes shining so brightly that they almost mirrored the lights above. Women moved gracefully in flowing gowns that shimmered with subtle sequins, catching the attention of anyone passing by. But despite all the glitter and glamour, the eyes of many were drawn to one particular object that sat in the center of the room, a piano. It was not new. In fact, it had seen better days. The wood was slightly scratched in places, the keys were a little worn, and a few of them were chipped. The finish had dulled over the years, and there was a faint warping that made it look fragile. Some guests had walked past it and barely noticed, assuming it was merely a decoration, a leftover from a bygone era. But one man lingered. He was a billionaire, known across the city not only for his wealth but also for his peculiar sense of humor and his tendency to do things no one could predict. He stood near the piano, hands casually folded behind his back, eyes tracing the outline of the keys. He was smiling, though subtly, almost as if he had a private joke in mind that no one else could understand. He had been invited to the gala, not just because of his fortune, but also because of the influence he held. He could turn the simplest event into a spectacle, and everyone knew it. Yet tonight, he was quiet, observing the guests more than participating. The room was full of chatter. Waiters moved between tables, carrying trays of sparkling drinks and small plates with delicate appetizers. A few people passed by the piano, pausing briefly, curious about the instrument, and then moved on. Some wondered why a broken piano was placed so prominently in the room. It seemed out of place among the polished floors and expensive decor. He stepped closer to the piano, and the soft sound of his shoes against the marble floor seemed unusually loud in the quiet that surrounded him. The lights reflected off the black lacquer of the piano, highlighting the scratches and the dull spots where it had lost its shine. He lifted the fallboard and let his fingers hover over the keys. They didn't touch the piano yet. He was simply letting the guests notice him. Some did, some didn't. Some whispered to each other, wondering what he was about to do. He didn't rush. He rarely did. His presence alone made people curious, and he seemed to enjoy that. As he sat down, the murmurs of the crowd grew louder. He pressed one key gently, and it sounded slightly off. The note lingered in the air, and he pressed another. It was uneven, the kind of sound that made it clear this piano had not been properly maintained. Some guests smiled politely, assuming he was playing poorly. Others raised their eyebrows, trying to hide their amusement. The billionaire didn't seem to notice, or perhaps he did, and that was exactly what he wanted. He leaned back slightly, pretending to struggle with the piano, tilting his head as if the keys were fighting him. The audience began to relax, letting out soft laughter here and there. It seemed that everyone had already decided the billionaire couldn't play, and the piano was hopelessly broken. The air changed subtly when he started to play more dramatically. Each note was intentionally awkward, each pause slightly too long. He hit a key hard and let it ring, then immediately moved to another, missing the rhythm completely. The room began to fill with polite giggles and some quiet whispers. People leaned towards each other, commenting on his terrible skills with suppressed laughter. Some of the wealthiest and most powerful individuals in the room thought they were watching a funny moment. A billionaire doing something childish to amuse himself and others. But they didn't realize that behind the casual smile on his face, there was a plan. He looked up briefly at the crowd, making eye contact with a few people who had been particularly critical. There was a sparkle in his eye, a hint that he knew something they didn't. The laughter continued, louder now, as if the awkwardness of the music was infectious. But for him, the laughter was not mocking. It was part of the performance. Every incorrect note, every exaggerated pause, every loud, clumsy chord was carefully timed to provoke reaction. He was drawing people in, teaching them something about perception without them realizing it yet. Guests began to whisper more among themselves. "Is he really that bad?" one woman asked, trying to hide her amusement. "I thought he was a serious musician," said another man. People shook their heads, some chuckled nervously, and others simply watched, intrigued. The energy in the room shifted from casual observation to subtle curiosity. People began to lean in slightly, wondering if the next note would make them laugh even harder, or if he would surprise them. The billionaire didn't rush. He let the moment linger, enjoying the small waves of attention as they washed over the room. While all eyes were on him, he noticed a young pianist standing quietly in the corner. The young pianist had been invited by the organizers to provide some music for the evening, but so far he had stayed in the background. His fingers twitched slightly, betraying nervous anticipation. He was dressed in a simple black suit, blending in with the crowd, and his eyes followed every movement the billionaire made. He seemed unsure whether to approach or wait. The billionaire caught the gaze, and a slight, almost imperceptible nod passed between them. The young pianist's heartbeat quickened. Though no one else noticed the exchange, the billionaire leaned forward again, pressing keys dramatically, then slamming his hands down as if the piano had suddenly become uncooperative. The audience reacted with laughter, some trying to hide it behind champagne glasses, others chuckling outright. Some guests rolled their eyes, assuming he was mocking them, the event, or the music itself. But no one could guess that every movement, every note, was part of a carefully orchestrated plan that only the billionaire fully understood. He was performing, but it was not just about music. It was about setting the stage, creating anticipation, and drawing attention to something beyond what anyone could see at that moment. A few people in the crowd began to record the performance on their phones. They whispered to each other, joking that this would make a funny video for social media. Others continued to watch live, curious to see what the billionaire would do next. The energy in the room was electric, a mixture of amusement, skepticism, and anticipation. Even those who had initially dismissed the piano as broken or the billionaire as foolish couldn't look away. He had captured their attention completely, and he didn't even have to speak. As the music continued, more laughter arose. Some guests clutched their sides, others shook their heads, trying to contain their amusement. The pianist's exaggerated movements, the way he leaned dramatically over the keys, the long pauses where no sound came, all of it was part of the story he was telling without words. The audience was unwittingly participating in a performance that seemed chaotic on the surface, but had hidden intention beneath. The young pianist watched closely. His eyes widened slightly as he began to sense the rhythm hidden behind the chaos. He noticed the timing, the deliberate pauses, and the way the billionaire used silence as much as sound, though the crowd only saw a billionaire failing to play properly. The young pianist recognized something else's structure, a plan, and perhaps even a lesson in disguise. He felt a mixture of admiration and nervous anticipation. This was no ordinary display. It was something more. As the first half of the performance came to a close, the billionaire paused and lifted his hands. The silence that followed was almost deafening. Guests leaned forward instinctively, unsure if he was about to start again or end. Some whispered guesses, trying to figure out what would happen next. The air was thick with curiosity, and even those who had mocked him moments before now found themselves unsure of what to expect. He had captured their attention completely, not with perfection, but with unpredictability, showmanship, and confidence. Then, with a subtle glance at the young pianist, he smiled. The crowd did not notice the exchange, but it was enough to hint that something was about to change. His fingers hovered above the keys again, but this time there was a sense of suspense in the room. Guests leaned in slightly, their curiosity piqued. They were unaware that the evening was about to take an unexpected turn, one that would shift their understanding of talent, humility, and perception. The laughter that had filled the room moments ago had quieted to whispers. The glimmering chandeliers reflected in the polished wood of the piano, making it appear almost magical under the soft light. Guests exchanged puzzled looks, some shaking their heads, others raising eyebrows, all waiting to see what the billionaire would do next. His presence, his smile, his deliberate mistakes had transformed a simple charity gala into something memorable. And as he sat there, pretending to wrestle with the broken piano. The audience did not yet know that this was only the beginning of a story that would surprise them, teach them, and leave them talking long after the evening had ended. What appeared to be a simple act of amusement was slowly becoming a lesson in perception, patience, and unexpected brilliance. The room had settled into an uneasy silence. Some guests whispered to each other, unsure if the billionaire was done or if more awkward notes would follow. The laughter from moments before had faded into an expectant curiosity. Everyone's eyes were fixed on him, drawn by a mixture of amusement and intrigue. He lifted his hands slowly, letting them hover over the worn keys. The faint creak of the piano under his touch seemed louder than it should, and it drew attention to the fragile instrument in a way that no one had noticed before. Then, with a deliberate flair, he pressed a key. The note rang out slightly off, uneven, almost as if the piano itself were complaining. Another note followed, harsh and jarring, and a few guests covered their smiles, unsure whether to laugh or look concerned. But he didn't stop there. He played a series of clumsy, disjointed notes, dragging his fingers across the keys in a manner that seemed almost theatrical. Every movement was exaggerated, every pause deliberate. And yet beneath the awkwardness, there was a rhythm that no one could quite recognize. Some guests whispered nervously. "He can't really be serious," one man said, leaning toward his companion. "It's almost painful to listen." A woman sitting nearby nodded, trying not to giggle. "I can't believe he's doing this in front of everyone," she whispered. Others laughed quietly, trying to hide it behind champagne glasses. There was a sense that the entire room was participating in a shared secret, though none of them understood what that secret might be. The billionaire's calm, confident demeanor made the awkward music seem intentional, though no one could yet figure out why. As he continued, he began to move his body in ways that added to the drama. He leaned far to one side, pressing the keys with exaggerated force. He lifted his head as if listening to the piano complain. Sometimes, he let his hands hover over the keys, pausing just long enough to make the audience anticipate the next offbeat sound. The room reacted to every movement. Some gasped quietly, some smirked, and some whispered guesses about what would happen next. The attention of every guest had been captured completely. Few people in the crowd began to record the performance on their phones. They laughed softly to themselves, imagining posting the video online as a humorous moment. Some guests tried to predict the next note, leaning forward, expecting a mistake. Others leaned back, unsure if they should react at all. The energy in the room was unusual. The combination of awkward music, dramatic gestures, and subtle mystery had created a tension that made everyone pay attention. The billionaire's performance was chaotic, but it was also captivating. From across the room, the young pianist watched carefully. He had been hesitant at first, standing quietly in the corner, unsure if he should approach or wait. But now, as he observed the billionaire, he began to notice a pattern in the chaos. The pauses, the exaggerated mistakes, the unexpected dynamics, they were all deliberate. He could feel a rhythm behind the disorder, a hidden structure that made sense only to someone paying very close attention. His fingers twitched slightly, as if responding to the unseen cues. A mixture of nervousness and excitement pulsed through him. Something unusual was happening, and he wanted to be ready for it. The billionaire's expression never changed. He seemed calm, confident, almost serene, despite the awkwardness of his playing. That calmness unsettled some guests. They were used to people reacting to mistakes with embarrassment or frustration. But here was a man who appeared completely in control of every note, every pause, and every gesture. Some began to sense that the performance was more than it appeared. They leaned forward slightly, curiosity growing, as if they were on the edge of discovering a hidden truth. Then came a moment that made the audience gasp softly. The billionaire pressed a key much harder than before, and the sound that came out was sharp and loud, almost jarring. The piano groaned under the force, the note echoing across the hall. Some guests flinched, unsure if it was intentional or a mistake. But he let it hang for a moment, letting the room absorb the sudden intensity, the contrast between the awkward notes and the sharp, commanding sound created a tension that made the audience sit up straighter. They had begun to realize that the performance was carefully controlled. Even if they didn't yet understand why, he continued to play, moving through sequences that seemed nonsensical to the casual listener. Notes clashed, rhythms broke, and yet there was a subtle beauty hidden beneath the chaos. Some guests tried to find it, scanning the patterns, listening closely, but it remained elusive. The performance was like a puzzle, one that required patience and attention. The young pianist in the corner understood that. He watched every movement, every pause, every subtle shift in tempo. He felt as if the billionaire were speaking to him through the music. Though no words were exchanged, a few guests began to whisper among themselves. "It's like he's pretending," one said. "But why?" Another shook their head. "I don't understand. Is he making fun of us, or the piano?" They couldn't decide. The uncertainty created a strange mix of amusement and tension. People laughed at the odd notes, but leaned forward at the same time, waiting for the next unexpected turn. The billionaire had created a performance that was both entertaining and mysterious, and the crowd couldn't look away. The young pianist took a small, careful step forward, his eyes fixed on the man at the piano. He noticed subtle shifts in posture, the way the billionaire used silence as much as sound. Every exaggerated movement had a purpose. Every awkward note was intentional. He realized that this was not a display of incompetence, but a lesson in disguise. The billionaire was showing the audience something important about patience, perception, and the way people judge what they see. The young pianist's heartbeat quickened. He felt as if he were part of something bigger than the gala, something that would change the way he thought about music, performance, and life itself. Meanwhile, the audience continued to react. Laughter mixed with confusion, and whispers of curiosity spread through the room. People were trying to figure out if they were witnessing a joke, a performance, or a serious display of talent gone wrong. Some leaned on their companions for reassurance. Others recorded more videos thinking they would share them later as a humorous anecdote. The atmosphere was a mixture of tension, amusement, and anticipation. No one could predict what would happen next, and that unpredictability kept everyone on edge. The billionaire paused again, letting the silence stretch for a few heartbeats. The guests leaned forward instinctively, waiting for the next note. The pause was deliberate, and it created a moment of suspense that made everyone focus completely. Some even forgot to breathe as they waited. Then he pressed a key, and the note came out slightly off, just like before. A few people tensed, expecting another mistake, but nothing else happened immediately. The suspense held them in place, curious and slightly anxious. Then, unexpectedly, he shifted his gaze toward the young pianist. It was a small movement, almost imperceptible, but the young man noticed it instantly. His heart raced. Something was about to change. The audience did not notice the exchange. All they saw was a billionaire continuing to play a broken piano awkwardly, but behind the scenes a connection had been made. The young pianist could feel the unspoken instructions, a silent signal that told him it was his moment to step forward. The billionaire leaned back slightly, letting his hands hover over the keys. The audience laughed softly at the awkward pauses, unaware that the moment of revelation was near. He had drawn their attention completely, and when the time came, the impact would be far greater than anyone expected. Every detail, the exaggerated movements, the awkward notes, the pauses, the tension had been carefully designed to create maximum effect. The young pianist prepared himself, standing quietly, ready to play when the signal came. The room was completely captivated. Even those who had initially dismissed the performance as foolish now watched with rapt attention. They could feel that something extraordinary was about to happen, even if they did not know what it was. The billionaire's calm, deliberate movements created a sense of anticipation that no one could resist. Guests leaned forward, eyes wide, hearts beating a little faster. The energy in the hall was palpable, a mixture of suspense, curiosity, and excitement. Then came a final, deliberate pause. The billionaire lifted his hands high above the keys, holding them there for a moment that seemed to stretch on forever. The audience leaned in, some whispering softly, others holding their breath. And in that moment, the young pianist stepped forward, ready to take his place. The room didn't notice him yet, but soon they would. The stage had been set. The chaotic, awkward, mysterious performance was about to transform into something unforgettable. The billionaire's eyes sparkled faintly as he watched the young pianist. He had accomplished exactly what he intended. The audience was on edge, completely absorbed and unaware of the hidden structure that had been guiding their attention. The young pianist's hands trembled slightly, but he felt ready. He understood, somehow, that this was a chance to show his talent to an audience that thought they knew everything about the moment. The anticipation was electric, and the energy in the room was almost tangible. For the first time, the guests noticed the young pianist stepping forward. Whispers spread through the room as people turned to see him. Some were curious, some skeptical, and some still unsure what was happening. But the suspense, the drama, and the tension created by the billionaire's pretend performance had prepared them for this moment perfectly. They were about to witness something extraordinary, though no one could guess just how much it would affect them. The stage was set. The piano, the audience, the billionaire, and the young pianist were all in place. The chaotic performance had served its purpose, and in the next few moments, everything would change. The young pianist's heart pounded in his chest. The sound of the last awkward note from the billionaire still lingered in the hall, and the audience's eyes were fixed on the piano, expecting more clumsy chaos. For a moment he hesitated, wondering if he was ready. His fingers itched to move, but his mind raced with doubt. Could he truly live up to the anticipation? Could he play well enough to capture the attention of a crowd already confused and amused by the billionaire's antics? He took a deep breath, letting the tension drain slightly from his shoulders. He felt the gaze of the billionaire upon him, calm and encouraging, yet almost imperceptibly challenging. That look gave him the courage he needed. Slowly, carefully, he lowered himself onto the piano bench. He could hear the soft rustle of fabric as the guests leaned forward, whispering among themselves. Some were still laughing quietly at the supposed failure, while others squinted, trying to figure out what was about to happen. The room held its collective breath, unaware that a transformation was about to begin. His fingers hovered above the keys for a brief moment. Feeling the worn surfaces, the slight unevenness of a few old notes, the piano was no longer broken, not in the hands of someone who knew how to breathe life into it. The young pianist pressed the first key. The note rang out clear and resonant, filling the hall with a sound that made some guests sit straighter in their chairs. It was soft at first, delicate and careful. Like the opening of a story that demanded attention, he continued, slowly building a melody that was gentle and thoughtful. The room quieted even more. Laughter had faded, replaced by curiosity. People shifted in their seats, leaning forward as though drawn by an invisible force. The young pianist's hands moved with precision and feeling, each note chosen with care, each pause deliberate. The music carried emotion, hope, tension, and beauty all at once. Guests began to whisper to each other, stunned at the sudden change. What had seemed like a broken piano and an awkward performance had become something entirely different, something mesmerizing. The billionaire leaned back slightly, letting the young pianist take control. He smiled faintly, his eyes reflecting satisfaction, as if he had orchestrated this moment from the beginning. The audience, however, had no idea. They were too captivated by the transformation happening right before their eyes. The melody grew stronger, richer, and more confident, and people could feel the energy shift in the room. Even those who had mocked the piano or the billionaire's performance, moments ago now listened in awe. The young pianist moved with growing confidence, his fingers dancing across the keys. He felt a connection not only to the piano but also to the room itself. Every sound seemed to resonate with the guests, reaching into their awareness and stirring emotion. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. Others leaned forward, unable to resist the magnetic pull of the performance. It was as if the piano had been waiting for someone to unlock its potential. And now the young pianist had done just that. The billionaire remained seated to the side, watching quietly. He had achieved what he wanted. The audience had been drawn into a carefully constructed illusion, expecting failure, expecting comedy, and instead witnessing brilliance. He allowed the young pianist to shine, letting the moment unfold naturally. The contrast between the awkward, clumsy notes from earlier and the rich, controlled music now was striking. Guests exchanged glances, some whispering, "I didn't think it could sound like this," while others simply shook their heads. Awestruck, the young pianist's fingers moved more confidently now, guided by both instinct and experience. He played with a flow that seemed effortless, but was carefully calculated. The melody rose and fell, sometimes soft and tender, other times bold and commanding. It told a story that the audience could feel but not fully articulate. The music was no longer just a series of notes, it was a language. Speaking directly to the emotions of everyone in the room, a woman near the front leaned toward her companion, whispering softly, "It's beautiful. I've never heard anything like it." A man across the room nodded silently, his hand resting on the back of his chair as he absorbed every note. Some guests had tears forming at the corners of their eyes. Caught off guard by the depth of feeling that the piano now expressed, the billionaire smiled subtly, knowing that he had not only entertained, but had also prepared the room for a revelation that would stay with them long after the night ended. The young pianist shifted slightly, transitioning into a section that was more dynamic, faster, and intricate. His fingers moved with astonishing agility, hitting complex sequences that seemed impossible to follow, yet somehow maintained perfect harmony. The audience was spellbound. People leaned forward, unable to look away, their previous judgments forgotten. The contrast between expectation and reality made the performance even more powerful. What had been dismissed as failure had now become a triumph of skill, emotion, and timing. The music swelled, filling every corner of the hall. Guests who had been skeptical now sat in rapt attention, mouths slightly open, unable to find words to express what they were experiencing. The young pianist had turned the evening upside down. What had begun as a charity gala, with polite conversation and clinking glasses, had become a moment of shared astonishment and awe. The music united the audience, creating a sense of wonder and admiration that transcended social status or wealth. The billionaire leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees, watching intently. He had orchestrated this moment, knowing that the contrast between his pretend failure and the young pianist's skill would maximize the impact. Every awkward note he had played earlier now made sense in context. The audience, unaware of the hidden structure, was experiencing a profound lesson in humility, perception, and the power of timing. The billionaire's smirk was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it carried the satisfaction of a plan executed flawlessly. The young pianist's melody shifted again, moving into a section that was softer, more introspective. The notes were delicate, almost fragile, carrying a sense of vulnerability and honesty. Guests leaned closer to listen, some with eyes closed, some with hands resting lightly on the table, all absorbed by the story being told through sound. The music evoked memories, emotions, and reflections in everyone present. It was as though the piano, which had seemed broken, had finally found the voice it had always been waiting to express. A few guests glanced at each other, eyes wide with realization. "I thought he couldn't play," one whispered. "It was all a trick," said another. The realization spread slowly. They had been misled by appearances, expecting failure and mockery, and instead were witnessing brilliance. The young pianist's skill had revealed what the billionaire had subtly hinted at, that perception can be deceiving, and that true talent can exist where it is least expected. The music grew even more powerful, carrying energy and emotion that swept across the room. The young pianist's fingers moved with precision and passion, each note striking the perfect balance between control and expression. The audience was captivated, unable to blink, unable to move as the story unfolded in front of them. The piano had transformed from an object of mockery to an instrument of revelation. The contrast was so striking that it made every earlier moment of awkwardness feel intentional, perfectly crafted to enhance the impact of what was happening now. Even those who had been distracted by their phones or whispered comments moments ago were now fully present. Every eye was fixed on the piano, every ear attuned to the melody. The young pianist's hands flew across the keys, producing harmonies and sequences that were breathtaking in their complexity and beauty. The room seemed to pulse with the rhythm of the music, each note resonating through the hearts of the audience. They could feel the story even without understanding it fully, and it left a profound impression on everyone present. The billionaire allowed the young pianist to continue, never interrupting, never interjecting. This was the moment he had orchestrated, the reveal he had planned carefully from the beginning. The audience was beginning to grasp the lesson embedded in the performance. What is initially perceived as failure can hide extraordinary potential, and sometimes the most unexpected individuals are capable of inspiring the greatest awe. The young pianist transitioned into a slower section, one that was more emotional, more reflective. The notes were softer, almost whispering, and the audience leaned in to catch every sound. Some closed their eyes, letting the music paint pictures in their minds. Others glanced around, noticing the expressions of those near them: tears, smiles, awe, and quiet admiration. The young pianist's fingers glided over the keys with precision, creating a delicate balance of sound that made the audience feel as if they were part of the story themselves. A hush fell over the room as the final section approached. The young pianists played a series of cascading notes that built in intensity, rising and falling like waves. The audience sat on the edge of their seats, unable to predict what would come next, completely absorbed. The melody reached a peak of emotion, and then, with perfect timing, it softened, tapering into a gentle, lingering finish. The last note resonated through the hall, echoing softly, leaving a silence that felt alive with shared emotion. The audience was stunned. Some were clapping softly, uncertain whether to break the spell. Others sat in stunned silence, processing what they had just experienced. The young pianist's hands trembled slightly as he rested them on the keys, breathing deeply. He had given everything to the performance, and the audience's reaction reflected the depth of connection he had achieved. The piano, once thought broken, had sung with a voice more powerful than anyone could have imagined. The billionaire stood slowly, plodding quietly, his smile faint but full of pride. He had achieved exactly what he intended. The audience, once skeptical, now understood the power of perception, patience, and unexpected talent. The young pianist had transformed the room, leaving an impression that would linger long after the gala had ended. Whispers of astonishment spread. "I can't believe it," one guest said. "It was like magic," whispered another. People turned to each other, trying to share their thoughts, but words felt inadequate. The music had spoken for itself. It had revealed talent, humility, and brilliance in a single, unforgettable performance. The young pianist looked up, meeting the gaze of the billionaire, who nodded slightly. In that simple gesture, an unspoken bond of respect and understanding was exchanged. The evening, once ordinary, had become extraordinary. The audience had been taken on a journey from laughter and mockery to awe and inspiration. What had seemed like chaos had transformed into beauty. What had seemed like failure had revealed excellence. And through it all, the billionaire had quietly guided the experience, ensuring that the impact would be both profound and unforgettable. The guests remained seated, some wiping tears from their eyes, others simply staring, lost in thought. The young pianist stood, bowing lightly, and the audience erupted into applause, finally expressing what words could not convey. The piano, the performer, and the orchestrator of the evening had created a moment that none of them would forget. It was a lesson in humility, a celebration of hidden talent, and a reminder that appearances are not always what they seem. The billionaire gave a subtle, approving smile, knowing that the evening had achieved more than he could have imagined. The young pianist had not only played music, he had transformed the perception of everyone in the room. The audience now understood that true skill and beauty can exist even where it is least expected, and that sometimes the greatest lessons are revealed through patience, observation, and courage. The gala continued, but nothing would be quite the same. Conversations buzzed with amazement and reflection. Guests shared their astonishment with neighbors and friends. Some discussed the unexpected lesson in perception. Others marveled at the pianist's talent. The billionaire, having orchestrated the entire sequence, quietly observed from a distance, satisfied that the night had unfolded exactly as intended. The applause did not stop right away. At first it was hesitant, almost careful, as if the audience was unsure whether they should clap or remain silent. Then someone stood up. Then another. Soon the entire hall was filled with the sound of hands clapping louder and stronger with each passing second. What had begun as confusion had turned into pure admiration. The young pianist stood quietly near the piano, his chest rising and falling as he tried to steady his breathing. He had played with everything he had, and now the weight of the moment settled over him. Some guests wiped their eyes. Others smiled without realizing it. A few looked around the room, embarrassed by how quickly they had laughed earlier. They remembered the jokes, the whispers, the looks of amusement. Those moments now felt uncomfortable. The piano that had been mocked moments before had just filled the room with something deep and real. The young pianist bowed slightly, not too low, not dramatic, just respectful. The applause grew louder again. The billionaire remained standing, clapping slowly, his expression calm but satisfied. He did not rush to the piano or speak right away. He wanted the moment to belong to the young pianist, not to himself. People noticed this. Some whispered about it. Others nodded quietly, realizing that the silence earlier and the chaos before had all led to this exact reaction. The room felt different now. The energy had shifted from shallow excitement to something thoughtful and heavy with meaning. Guests began to talk among themselves. Some leaned close to their companions, voices low but emotional. They spoke about how unexpected the performance was, how wrong their assumptions had been. A woman near the back shook her head slowly and said she would never judge talent so quickly again. A man near the front stared at the piano as if seeing it for the first time. The sound of glasses clinking returned, but softer now, more careful. As if no one wanted to break the feeling that still hung in the air. The young pianist stepped back from the bench, unsure what to do next. He was not used to this kind of attention. His hands still trembled slightly. He had spent years practicing in quiet rooms, often unnoticed, often doubting himself. Tonight had changed something, though he could not yet explain what it was. He looked toward the billionaire, who gave a small nod, encouraging but not overwhelming. That small gesture grounded him. A few guests approached cautiously, offering kind words. They praised the music, the emotion, the control. Some apologized without directly saying sorry. Their tones said enough. The young pianist thanked them quietly, his voice soft, his words simple. He did not boast or explain. He let the music speak for him. That humility only deepened the respect people felt. Across the room, several people were still holding their phones. Staring at the videos they had recorded earlier, they replayed the awkward notes, the laughter, the clumsy performance. Then they compared it to what came next. The contrast shocked them. Some deleted their earlier clips out of embarrassment. Others kept the full recording, realizing it showed a powerful lesson from start to finish. Whispers spread that this moment would be talked about for a long time. The organizers of the event gathered near the stage area, exchanging looks of surprise and relief. They had worried when the billionaire first sat at the piano. They feared the moment would ruin the evening. Now they realized it had elevated it beyond anything they had planned. One of them quietly said that this would be the most remembered gala they had ever hosted. Another nodded, already thinking about how to explain the moment in future interviews. The billionaire finally stepped forward. He did not take center stage. He stood beside the piano, hands relaxed at his sides. When he spoke, his voice was calm and steady, not loud, not dramatic. He thanked the guests for their patience and attention. He spoke briefly about how easy it is to judge too quickly, how silence is often mistaken for lack of skill, and how broken things are sometimes only waiting for the right hands. He did not lecture. He did not point fingers. He let the audience connect the dots themselves. People listened closely. No one interrupted. No one laughed. His words landed because they came after experience, not before it. The young pianist stood nearby, listening, realizing that this night was about more than music. It was about trust, opportunity, and being seen. When the billionaire finished speaking, he stepped back again, allowing the applause to rise naturally. This time, it felt different. It felt respectful. The evening continued, but the mood had changed. Conversations were deeper. Guests spoke less about wealth and status and more about moments in their own lives when they had misjudged someone. Some shared stories of overlooked talent, of chances never given. Others spoke about children, students, or colleagues they now saw in a new light. The piano performance had opened something in them that wine and speeches never could. The young pianist found himself surrounded by interest. People asked where he had studied, how long he had played, what his future plans were. He answered honestly. He spoke of long hours of doubt, of quiet hope. He did not exaggerate. He did not try to impress. That honesty drew people closer. A few guests exchanged looks, already thinking about opportunities, introductions, and support. The billionaire watched all of this from a distance. He did not insert himself into conversations. He did not seek praise. He had seen this pattern before. He knew that true impact comes when attention shifts away from the one who creates the stage and toward the one who finally gets to stand on it. He felt no need to explain himself further. The lesson had already landed. Later in the evening, as dessert was served and the lights softened, the young pianist sat quietly at a table, finally able to breathe. The noise around him felt distant. He replayed the performance on his mind, still surprised by how it had unfolded. Fear had almost stopped him from stepping forward. If he had hesitated longer, the moment might have passed. That thought stayed with him.